The scorching desert sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Al Hassan mansion, where Sarah Bennett methodically dusted the intricate Arabian ornaments that adorned the endless hallways. At 26, she had spent the last 2 years working as a maid in this opulent residence, thousands of miles away from her humble origins in Manchester, England. Every movement she made was careful, deliberate, a reflection of the discipline she had developed since arriving in the United Arab Emirates. The mansion's owner, Karim Al Hassan, was known for his strict attention to detail and preference for solitude. At 38, he had built an empire that extended far beyond his family's traditional businesses, yet he remained unmarried, a constant source of tension within his traditional family. Sarah had learned to anticipate his habits, ensuring she was never in his way while maintaining the impeccable standards he demanded. That morning, however, was different. As Sarah cleaned the library, Karim's favorite refuge, she found him standing by the window, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished by what appeared to be deep contemplation. She attempted to retreat quietly, but his voice stopped her. "Miss Bennett," he called, his accent barely noticeable after years of international education. "Please, stay for a moment." Sarah froze, her heart racing. In 2 years, they had barely exchanged more than necessary pleasantries. She turned to face him, maintaining the professional distance that had always characterized their interactions. "I have a proposition for you," Karim continued, his dark eyes intense but unreadable. "One that could solve both our problems." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face because he gestured for her to sit, something that had never happened before. She perched uncertainly on the edge of an antique chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand your mother is ill," he stated, causing Sarah's breath to catch. How did he know about that? And that the treatment she needs is expensive? The mention of her mother made Sarah's chest tighten. Margaret Bennett had been diagnosed with a serious condition that required immediate intervention, but the costs were far beyond what Sarah could afford on her salary, even with her careful savings. "Sir, she began, but Karim raised his hand, silencing her. "I have a dilemma of my own," he continued, pacing the room with measured steps. "My family expects an heir. The pressure increases daily, yet I have no interest in the traditional arrangements they propose." Sarah remained silent, unable to guess where this conversation was heading. The morning sun, streaming through the vast windows, created a golden halo around Karim's silhouette, lending an almost surreal quality to the scene. "I propose a business arrangement," he said finally, turning to face her directly. "A contract, if you will. You would carry a child, my heir. In return, I would provide enough compensation to cover your mother's medical expenses and ensure your financial security for life." The words hung in the air like desert heat, heavy and overwhelming. Sarah felt as though the oxygen had been sucked from the room. She stared at him, wondering if she had misheard or if this was some strange dream brought on by the Arabian sun. "This would be a strictly professional arrangement," Karim continued, his voice maintaining its businesslike tone. "After the birth, you would be free to leave with your compensation. The child would remain with me as my heir. Everything would be legally documented to protect both our interests." Sarah's mind whirled with implications. The prospect was shocking, almost impossible to process. Yet, as the initial shock began to fade, her mother's face flashed before her eyes. Pale, brave, trying to hide her pain during their last video call. "Why me?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Karim's expression softened slightly. "You're educated, responsible, and discreet. I've observed your work ethic and integrity over the past 2 years. You understand both Western and Eastern cultures, which would be valuable for a child in my position. And most importantly, you have a compelling reason to accept." The library fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Through the windows, Sarah could see the endless expanse of desert, its golden dunes stretching toward the horizon. The vastness seemed to mirror the magnitude of the decision before her. I need time to think," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course," Karim nodded. "Take 3 days. But remember, discretion is paramount." If you accept, everything must remain absolutely confidential. Sarah rose from the chair, her legs unsteady. As she reached the door, Karim's voice stopped her once more. "Miss Bennett," he called, causing her to turn back. "I understand this is an unusual proposal, but sometimes the most unexpected solutions are the ones that work best." She nodded mutely and stepped into the hallway, closing the heavy door behind her. The cool marble under her feet seemed to ground her as she leaned against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 15 minutes, her world had tilted on its axis, presenting her with an impossible choice that could change everything, or cost her everything she believed in. The following days passed in a blur for Sarah as she went about, her duties, Karim's proposal echoing in her mind like a persistent desert wind. She found herself studying his interactions with the staff more closely, noting the quiet authority he commanded and the occasional glimpses of loneliness that seemed to shadow his movements. During her evening video call with her mother, Sarah could barely focus on their conversation. Margaret Bennett's face was gaunt, her once vibrant blue eyes dulled by pain, though she still managed to smile as she asked about Sarah's day. The sight of her mother's deteriorating condition made Karim's offer seem less outlandish with each passing hour. "You seem distracted, darling," Margaret observed, her British accent crackling through the connection. "Is everything all right at work?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just busy, Mum. How are you feeling today?" Before her mother could answer, a commotion in the mansion's main hall caught Sarah's attention. Through her partially open door, she could hear raised voices, something unusual in the typically quiet household. "This is unacceptable, Karim." The voice belonged to Amira Al-Hassan, Karim's older sister. "You cannot continue to reject every suitable match we present to you. The family's reputation is not determined by my marital status," Karim's controlled voice interrupted. "I've built our business beyond anything father could have imagined. That should be enough." Sarah ended her call with her mother, promising to call back later. She couldn't help but listen as the siblings' argument continued, their voices carrying through the elaborate corridors. "You're being selfish," Amira accused. "Our traditions exist for a reason. A proper marriage alliance could strengthen our position in the region. Instead, you hide in this mansion like a recluse, refusing to fulfill your responsibilities." "I fulfill my responsibilities every day," Karim responded, his voice taking on an edge Sarah had never heard before. "But I will not have my personal life dictated by outdated customs." The sound of heels clicking on marble indicated Amira's approach toward the residential wing. Sarah quickly busied herself with folding linens, trying to appear absorbed in her task as the elegant woman passed by. Amira paused, her perfectly made-up face regarding Sarah with barely concealed disdain. "You the English maid," Amira said, her accent more pronounced than her brother's. "How long have you worked here?" 2 years, ma'am," Sarah responded, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. "And in that time, have you noticed my brother entertaining any special guests?" The implication in her tone made Sarah's cheeks flush. "Mr. Al-Hassan is very private, ma'am. I wouldn't presume to—" "Of course you wouldn't," Amira cut her off. "Just remember your place in this household. We may not be as progressive as some, but we maintain certain standards." After Amira's departure, Sarah retreated to her room, her mind churning. The conversation she'd overheard added new layers of complexity to Karim's proposition. She understood now that his offer wasn't just about having an heir. It was an act of rebellion against the suffocating expectations of his family. Later that evening, as Sarah performed her final duties for the day, she found herself in the mansion's vast kitchen. The chef, an elderly Egyptian woman named Fatima, who had worked for the Al-Hassan family for decades, was preparing the next day's meals. "You look troubled, Habibti," Fatima observed, using the affectionate Arabic term she reserved for those she favored. "Is it about the argument we all pretended not to hear?" Sarah hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I've never seen Mr. Al-Hassan so confrontational." Fatima's wise eyes studied her as she chopped vegetables with practiced efficiency. "That man carries many burdens. His father's legacy, his sister's expectations, the weight of tradition. But he has his mother's spirit. She too refused to be bound by others' expectations. His mother? Sarah asked, realizing she knew nothing about Karim's parents. Ah, a remarkable woman, Fatima smiled sadly. She believed in following one's heart, even when it led down unexpected paths. Karim was very young when we lost her, but her influence shaped him more than he realizes. The conversation with Fatima added another piece to the puzzle that was Karim al-Hassan. Sarah returned to her room, where a letter from her mother's doctor waited in her email. The estimated costs of the surgery and subsequent treatment made her head spin. Her salary, even with 2 years of careful saving, wouldn't cover a fraction of it. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the contract sitting in Karim's library. A business arrangement, he'd called it. Simple, straightforward, life-changing. But as she'd learned today, nothing in the Al-Hassan household was ever simple. Every decision rippled outward, affecting an intricate web of relationships, expectations, and traditions. The desert wind whistled outside her window, carrying with it the faint scent of night-blooming jasmine from the mansion's gardens. Sarah realized that her 3 days were nearly up. Soon she would have to give Karim an answer, one that would alter not only her life but the future of the Al-Hassan family. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like the heavy Arabian night, full of shadows and unspoken possibilities. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah woke before dawn, her decision crystallizing in the quiet hours between night and day. The first rays of sunlight were just beginning to paint the desert sky in shades of pink and gold. As she made her way to the library, knowing Karim would be there for his morning coffee and newspaper ritual. She found him exactly where she expected, his tall frame silhouetted against the window. He turned at the sound of her entrance, and for a moment they regarded each other in silence, the weight of possibility hanging between them. "I accept," Sarah said simply, her voice steadier than she felt. Karim's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "You understand the full implications of what you're agreeing to?" "I do," she nodded, "but I have conditions of my own." This caught his attention. He gestured for her to continue, setting aside his untouched coffee. "First, I want all medical expenses for my mother guaranteed in writing, not just the current treatment, but any future care she might need," Sarah stated, drawing strength from her purpose. "Second, I want to continue working here until it happens. No special treatment, no changes to my routine. And third, I want your word that this stays between us. No staff, no family, not even your sister." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Karim's mouth. "You've given this considerable thought." "I had to. This isn't just about money for me, Mr. Al-Hassan. This is about my mother's life and whatever life we're planning to create." The use of "we" caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Karim moved to his desk and retrieved a thick envelope. "The contract is here, along with documents for your mother's medical care. My lawyers have already arranged everything. Your conditions are acceptable, though keeping this from Amira may prove challenging." As if summoned by her name, the sound of Amira's voice carried from the hallway, growing closer. Sarah's heart raced as Karim swiftly moved to the door, stepping out to intercept his sister, while Sarah clutched the envelope, frozen in place. "Brother, we need to discuss the dinner arrangement with the Al-Mansouri family." Amira's voice drifted through the door. "Their daughter." "Not now, Amira." Karim's firm tone left no room for argument. "I have important business matters to attend to." "Business, always business. When will you understand that some things are more important than contracts and meetings?" Their voices faded as Karim successfully steered his sister away from the library. Sarah released the breath she'd been holding, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the envelope. The documents inside were comprehensive, written in both Arabic and English. Everything was exactly as Karim had promised. The medical coverage for her mother, the financial arrangements, the strict confidentiality clauses. But it was the last page that made her pause. In clear legal language, it laid out the terms for the child, their child. The baby would be registered as Karim's heir, with Sarah relinquishing all legal rights. There would be no contact after the birth, no claims, no connection to the life she would help create. As she read through the terms, Sarah's professional mask slipped slightly. The clinical language made it sound so simple, so transactional. But there was nothing simple about carrying a child for 9 months, feeling it grow, knowing all along, though that she would have to walk away. The sound of returning footsteps made her quickly compose herself. Karim re-entered the library, closing the door firmly behind him. "My sister can be persistent," he said, running a hand through his dark hair in a rare display of frustration. "She's arranged another dinner with a potential bride's family. She won't stop until I'm properly married, according to tradition. And this," Sarah gestured to the contract, "this isn't according to tradition." "No," he agreed, his voice softening slightly. "But tradition hasn't brought me happiness or peace. Perhaps it's time for a different approach." Sarah looked down at the contract again, then at the man who had already signed his name at the bottom of each page. In the morning light, she could see the subtle signs of stress in his face, the slight tension in his shoulders. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman making a convenient arrangement. He was a man fighting against the crushing weight of expectations and loneliness. "When do we begin?" she asked, picking up the pen he had left beside the contract. "The medical appointments have been arranged. Everything will be handled with the utmost discretion. Dr. Patel is highly respected and completely trustworthy." Sarah nodded, then with a steady hand began signing the documents. Each signature felt momentous, like stepping stones across a river of no return. When she finished, Karim gathered the papers carefully. "Welcome to our arrangement, Miss Bennett," he said formally, but then added in a softer tone, "Thank you." As Sarah left the library, the magnitude of what she had just agreed to settled over her like a heavy blanket. She had just signed away part of her future, but in doing so, she had secured her mother's. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed brighter somehow, as if illuminating the new path she had chosen. Back in her quarters, she immediately began researching the best specialists for her mother's condition. For the first time in months, she felt hope replacing the constant anxiety that had been her companion. Yet as she worked, she couldn't help but wonder about the other life she would soon be nurturing, a life that would belong to the Al-Hassan family, not to her. The day proceeded as usual, but everything felt different. Each time she passed Karim in the hallways, their shared secret created an invisible thread between them, a connection that neither had anticipated. The contract might specify a business arrangement, but they both knew they were embarking on something far more complex than mere business. The weeks that followed brought subtle changes to the Al-Hassan mansion. While Sarah maintained her usual routines, there was an undercurrent of anticipation in every interaction she had with Karim. Their appointments with Dr. Patel were carefully scheduled during her off hours, with the doctor's discretion assured by both professional ethics and a generous retainer. The first success came quietly, confirmed in the sterile environment of Dr. Patel's private clinic. Sarah sat in stunned silence as the doctor delivered the news, while Karim remained outwardly composed, though his tightly clasped hands betrayed his emotion. "Everything appears excellent, Doctor," Patel assured them, her experienced eyes taking in their contrasting reactions. "I'll want to see you regularly for monitoring, but for now, everything is proceeding perfectly." The drive back to the mansion was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they reached the privacy of the library that Karim finally spoke. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his usual confidence giving way to uncertain concern. Sarah managed a small smile. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just real now, isn't it?" He nodded, moving to the window in what she had come to recognize as his thinking pose. "I've arranged for additional medical coverage for you, beyond what's in the contract. Any discomfort, any concern, no matter how small, I want you to have it addressed immediately." The care in his voice surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. After all, she was carrying his heir, the future of his family line. Yet, something in his tone suggested more than just practical concern for his investment. Their moment of understanding was interrupted by the arrival of Amira, who swept into the library with her usual commanding presence. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, Sarah standing near the desk, Karim by the window, and narrowed slightly. "Why is the maid in your private space, brother?" she demanded, her voice carrying a hint of suspicion. Miss Bennet was assisting. "It's me with some documents," Karim replied smoothly. "That will be all for now, Miss Bennet." Sarah nodded and left quickly, but not before catching the calculating look in Amira's eyes. As she closed the door, she heard Amira's voice rise in excitement. "The Al-Mansouri family has accepted our dinner invitation. Their daughter, Layla, is perfectly suited for you, Karim. Beautiful, educated at the Sorbonne, from an impeccable lineage." The voices faded as Sarah moved away, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach. The reminder of Karim's position in society and the expectations that came with it sent a chill through her. What would happen when she began to show? How long could they maintain this secret in a household where walls had eyes and tongues whispered constantly? That evening, as Sarah prepared for bed, a soft knock at her door startled her. Opening it, cautiously she found Fatima, the elderly chef, holding a steaming cup of tea. "For nausea," the older woman said simply, pressing the cup into Sarah's hands. "My own special blend. It helped me through 3 pregnancies and countless other." "Women in this household," Sarah froze, her heart pounding. "I don't know what you—" "Habibti," Fatima interrupted gently. "I have lived long enough to recognize the signs and to keep secrets when they need keeping." She patted Sarah's hand comfortingly. "Drink the tea. Rest well. The early days are the hardest." Before Sarah could respond, Fatima had disappeared down the darkened hallway, leaving her with the aromatic tea and the realization that at least one person had seen through their careful facade. The following days brought new challenges. Morning sickness struck with unexpected force, though Fatima's tea helped considerably. Sarah found herself struggling to maintain her usual efficiency, fighting waves of fatigue as she went about her duties. Karim noticed, of course. He began appearing in whatever room she was working in, casually suggesting she take breaks, offering water or subtle support without drawing attention. One afternoon, as Sarah organized the vast collection of books in the library, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Amira was speaking to someone on the phone, her voice carrying through the partially open door. "Yes, I've noticed changes in my brother's behavior," Amira was saying. "He's distracted, spending more time at home than usual, and there's something about that English maid. I don't trust her. I want you to look into her background thoroughly, leave no stone unturned." Sarah's hands trembled as she shelved the books, her mind racing. A background check would reveal her mother's medical condition, her financial struggles, the recent arrangements for payment of hospital bills. How long before Amira connected the dots? Later that evening, she found Karim in his study, working, late as usual. When she told him about Amira's phone call, his reaction surprised her. Instead of concern, he smiled slightly. "Let her investigate," he said calmly. "Every payment, every arrangement has been made through legitimate channels. Your mother's medical care is being covered by an employee health benefit program I implemented months ago. There's nothing for her to find." His forethought should have reassured her, but Sarah still felt uneasy. "Your sister is very persistent." "Yes, she is," Karim agreed, his expression softening. "But so am I. Everything will be fine, Miss Bennet. Trust me." As weeks turned into months, the subtle dance of secrecy became increasingly difficult to maintain. Sarah's body was changing, though she did her best to conceal it with clever adjustments to her uniform. The morning sickness had mostly subsided, replaced by a healthy appetite that Fatima seemed determined to satisfy with specially prepared meals that mysteriously appeared in Sarah's quarters. The most challenging part wasn't the physical changes, but the emotional ones. Sarah found herself watching Karim more closely, noting the gentle way he treated the household staff, the quiet moments when he stood in the nursery he had begun, secretly preparing in a secluded wing of the mansion. She saw sides of him that contradicted his cold, businesslike exterior, the way his eyes softened when he inquired about her health, the careful attention he paid to every detail of her prenatal care. One evening, as Sarah organized files in his study, Karim received an unexpected visitor. Through the partially open door, she could hear the smooth, cultured voice of Ahmad al-Mansouri, a prominent businessman whose daughter, Layla, had been the subject of recent dinner arrangements. "Your sister speaks highly of the connection between our families," Ahmad was saying. "Layla is quite taken with you, and a union between our houses would be most advantageous." Sarah's hands stilled on the files, her heart pounding as she waited for Karim's response. "While I'm honored by your family's interest," Karim replied diplomatically, "I must be direct. I'm not seeking marriage at this time. My focus is on expanding our business interests in new directions." But that's precisely why this match would be perfect," Ahmad insisted. "Our combined resources could revolutionize the market. And Layla, she would make an excellent mother to your future heirs." The irony of his words made Sarah's stomach clench. She unconsciously placed a hand over her growing belly, where Karim's actual heir was already making its presence known. "I appreciate your proposal." Karim's voice remained steady. "But my decision is final." After Ahmad left, Sarah emerged from the study, finding Karim standing by his usual spot near the window. The tension in his shoulders was visible even from across the room. "You didn't have to reject them because of our arrangement," she said, softly. "The contract doesn't prevent you from marrying." Karim turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the fading daylight. "Is that what you think? That I'm sacrificing my chances for marriage because of our contract? Aren't you? Your sister clearly believes this match would be perfect for you." "My sister," he said with unexpected bitterness, "believes she knows what's best for everyone. But she doesn't understand what I want." "And what do you want?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop it. Karim's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the carefully maintained distance between them seemed to disappear. "I want," he began, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Amira, and she wasn't alone. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit, his expression professionally neutral. "Brother," Amira announced, her voice triumphant, "this is Mr. Rahman, a private investigator I hired to look into some concerns I've had." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Karim moved subtly, positioning himself between her and the newcomers. "Whatever concerns you have, Amira, they can wait until tomorrow," he said firmly. "No, they cannot," Amira insisted. "Mr. Rahman has discovered some very interesting information about your maid's recent activities. Large sums of money being transferred to a hospital in Manchester, suspicious medical appointments, unusual changes to employee benefits." "My personal staff arrangements are not your concern." Karim's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. "They are when they affect our family's reputation," Amira shot back. "What game are you playing, Karim? What hold does this girl have over you?" Sarah stood frozen, watching the siblings face off. The protective stance Karim had taken, the fury in Amira's eyes, the investigator's calculating gaze taking in every detail of the scene. It was all spiraling out of control. "Miss Bennett," Karim said without taking his eyes off his sister, "please return to your quarters. This is a family matter." "She's not going anywhere until we get to the bottom of this," Amira declared. "Mr. Rahman, share what else you've discovered." But before the investigator could speak, Fatima appeared in the doorway, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by stern authority. "Miss Amira, your guests for dinner have arrived early. They're waiting in the main hall." "What guests?" "I didn't arrange any," Amira began, but Fatima's meaningful look silenced her. Social obligations, especially unexpected ones, couldn't be ignored without risking offense. With a frustrated glare at Sarah, Amira swept out of the room, the investigator following in her wake. As soon as they were gone, Fatima gave Sarah a gentle push toward the service stairs. "Go, Habibti," she whispered. "Rest now. Some storms must pass before the sky clears." The following morning brought an unusual silence to the Al-Hassan mansion. Sarah woke to find a note from Fatima explaining that she had been given the day off, by whose orders it wasn't clear. Through her window she could see several expensive cars arriving, their occupants gathering in serious discussion near the main entrance. A soft knock at her door revealed Karim, looking more disheveled than she had ever seen him. His usual pristine appearance was marred by signs of a sleepless night. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here. Meet me in the garden house in 10 minutes. The garden house was a separate structure, originally built as a retreat for Karim's mother. Sarah had cleaned it regularly but had never seen anyone use it. When she arrived, Karim was already there, pacing the ornately tiled floor. "Amira knows," he said without preamble, "or at least she suspects enough to be dangerous. Her investigator is very thorough." Sarah sank into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly weak. "What do we do?" "I've spent the night considering our options." Karim finally stopped pacing, turning to face her. "I can handle the legal implications. Every document is ironclad, every payment legitimate. But the social fallout..." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "This could affect more than just us. My business partners are conservative. Many deals rely on personal relationships, on trust and reputation." "I could leave," Sarah offered quietly. "Go back to England." "The contract..." "No," Karim cut her off with unexpected force. "That's not an option. But your sister, your family's reputation..." "Do you know what my mother's last words to me were?" he interrupted, his voice softening. "She told me to live truthfully, even when truth was difficult. I've spent years trying to balance tradition with my own path, but maybe it's time to stop compromising." Before Sarah could respond, the garden house door opened. Fatima stood there, her face grave. "Miss Amira is gathering the family elders," she reported. "They're coming here now." Karim straightened, his business mask falling back into place. "Stay here," he told Sarah. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay in this room until I come for you." Buistosa, through the garden house windows, Sarah watched as a procession of elderly men and women made their way across the grounds, led by a triumphant-looking Amira. Their traditional clothing and stern expressions made them look like judges approaching a trial. Hours passed. Sarah could hear raised voices from the main house, though the words were indistinct. Fatima appeared occasionally, bringing water and light food, her face revealing nothing of what was transpiring. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, the door opened again. This time it was Karim's oldest uncle, Ahmed al-Hassan, a man Sarah had seen only in photographs hanging in the mansion's halls. His face was lined with age and authority, his eyes sharp as they assessed her. "So," he said in perfect English, "you are the one who has caused such upheaval in our family." Sarah stood, unconsciously resting a hand on her stomach. "Sir, He held up a hand, silencing her. "My nephew has spent the last several hours defending your arrangement. He speaks of honor, of keeping his word, of providing for his child. But he also speaks of something else, something he may not even realize himself." Sarah held her breath, waiting. "In our culture," Ahmed continued, "family is everything. Tradition guides us, shapes us, but it should not imprison us. My sister, Karim's mother, understood this better than anyone. She married for love, against many wishes, and gave us a son who has brought honor to our name through his own path." He moved to the window, watching as the other family members departed. "Amira believes she is protecting our family's honor, but sometimes honor lies in having the courage to forge new traditions." He turned back to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "The child you carry is Al-Hassan. Whatever circumstances led to its conception, it is family. And in our family, we protect our own." Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. "Sir, the contract..." "Contracts." Ahmed waved his hand dismissively. "Are for business. This has become something else entirely, hasn't it? I see it in my nephew's eyes when he speaks of you. I see it in the way he's transformed this past months. The question is, what do you see?" Before Sarah could respond, Karim appeared in the doorway. His tie loosened, his usual composure showing cracks of exhaustion. His eyes moved between his uncle and Sarah, questioning. "It is done," Ahmed announced. "The family accepts your decisions, nephew. Even Amira will come around in time. Now I believe you two have much to discuss." With that, he left them alone in the growing darkness of the garden house. The days following the family council brought subtle but significant changes to life. In the Al-Hassan mansion, the need for secrecy lifted. Sarah found herself in an unprecedented position. Her role remained officially that of a maid, but the staff's attitude toward her shifted. Fatima became more openly protective, while other servants offered small gestures of respect that made her both touched and uncomfortable. The most noticeable change was in Karim himself. The careful distance he had maintained began to dissolve, replaced by a more personal concern for her well-being. He insisted on having her quarters moved to a more comfortable wing of the mansion, closer to his own rooms, explaining it as a practical measure for her health. One evening, as Sarah arranged flowers in the newly decorated nursery, she found him watching her from the doorway. The room reflected both their cultures, traditional Arabian carved wooden furniture alongside modern British comfort, desert colors mixed with soft English pastels. "My mother would have loved this room," he said softly, entering the space. She always believed in blending traditions rather than forcing choices between them. Sarah adjusted a pale pink roses in a crystal vase. Fatima tells stories about her sometimes. She seems to have been quite remarkable. She was. Karim moved closer, his presence warming the air between them. She would have understood this situation better than anyone. She always said that life rarely follows the paths we expect. "And what path did you expect?" Sarah asked, turning to face him. "When you first proposed this arrangement?" Karim's dark eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "I expected a simple solution to a complex problem, a business transaction that would give us both what we needed. I didn't expect..." He paused, reaching out to touch a delicate wooden mobile hanging above the crib. "I didn't expect to feel this." "Wei?" The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Before either could speak further, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Amira's voice carried clearly, though her tone was different from her usual commanding manner. "Please, I just want to speak with them. With both of them." Fatima appeared in the doorway looking apologetic. "She insists. I told her you were not to be disturbed, but..." "It's all right," Karim sighed, gesturing for his sister to enter. "Come in, Amira." Sarah moved to leave, but Amira's next words stopped her. "No, please stay, Miss Bennett. What I have to say concerns you both." Amira looked different, humbled somehow, her usual perfect composure showing signs of strain. She took a deep breath, her fingers twisting together in an uncharacteristic show of nervousness. "I've been thinking about what Uncle Ahmed said, about Mother's choice to follow her heart," she began. "I've spent so many years trying to uphold our traditions that I forgot their true purpose, to protect and nurture family." She moved to the window, gazing out at the desert sunset. "Do you know why I pushed so hard for you to marry, brother? After our parents left us, I felt responsible. I wanted to ensure you had someone to care for you, to give you the family you deserved. I thought I knew best." She turned back to face them, her eyes glistening. "But I was wrong. You found your own path to family, even if it's not the one I would have chosen." Sarah felt tears threatening as Amira approached her, taking her hands in a gesture of acceptance. "Will you forgive me? For how I treated you, for the investigation, for everything?" The moment was interrupted by a flutter of movement beneath Sarah's hands. Without thinking, she guided Amira's hand to her rounded belly, where the baby was making its presence known with decisive kicks. Amira's eyes widened in wonder. "Is that your niece or nephew?" Sarah smiled. "They're quite active in the evenings." Karim moved closer, his own hand joining theirs, and for a moment the three of them stood connected by the new life that had brought such unexpected changes to their world. "Brother," Amira said softly, "I see now what Uncle Ahmed meant. This child is a blessing regardless of the circumstances, and Miss Bennett," she turned to Sarah with genuine warmth, "perhaps it's time we dispensed with such formality. My name is Amira, and you are carrying my family's future." The transformation of the Al Hassan mansion continued as Sarah's pregnancy progressed. What had once been a formal, almost austere environment began to soften around the edges. Amira, having embraced her role as future aunt, became a frequent visitor, bringing traditional sweets and sharing stories of their family history with Sarah during afternoon tea. One particular afternoon, as Sarah sat in the garden with Amira, The older woman pulled out an ornate wooden box filled with old photographs. "This was our mother," she said, handling a faded image with reverence. "Look how young she was when she married our father. Everyone said they were mismatched. She was too modern, too Western in her thinking. But their love changed our family's perspective on so many things." Sarah studied the photograph, noting the striking resemblance between Karim and his mother. The same determined set of the jaw, the same intelligent eyes. "She was beautiful," she said softly. "Yes, and strong." "Like someone else I know," Amira replied meaningfully. "She would have adored you, you know. Your quiet strength, your dignity in the face of my horrible behavior." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "And the way you've helped my brother find himself again." Before Sarah could respond, Karim appeared in the garden, his usual business attire replaced by more casual clothing. He had been spending more time at home lately, his workaholic tendencies giving way to a more balanced approach to life. "What are you two conspiring about?" he asked, settling into a chair beside them. "Just sharing family history," Amira smiled, showing him the photograph. "Remember that summer in Lebanon? Mother insisted on teaching us both to swim, even though father thought it wasn't proper for a young lady like me. And you turned out to be a better swimmer than I was," Karim laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent weeks. Sarah watched their interaction, touched by the warmth that had replaced the previous tension between the siblings. As she shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position, Karim immediately noticed her discomfort. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just the usual back pain," she assured him. "Dr. Patel says it's normal at this stage. Perhaps we should move inside," he suggested, already rising to help her up. "It's getting too warm out here." "Karim, I'm pregnant, not invalid," Sarah protested, but accepted his assistance with a small smile. Amira watched them with knowing eyes. "You know, brother, for someone who claimed this was just a business arrangement, you're showing remarkable investment in the details." Karim shot his sister a warning look, but she merely gathered her photographs with an innocent expression. "I'm just making an observation. As your older sister, it's my right, no, my duty, to point out what you might be too stubborn to see for yourself." Later that evening, Sarah found herself unable to sleep, the baby particularly active. She made her way to the kitchen, thinking to make some of Fatima's calming tea, only to find Karim already there, working on his laptop despite the late hour. "You should be resting," he said, closing his computer as she entered. "So should you," she countered, moving to prepare the tea. "Don't you have that important meeting tomorrow?" "It can wait. Here, let me do that." He took the kettle from her hands, their fingers brushing briefly. "Sit." As he prepared the tea with practiced ease, he'd obviously been paying attention to Fatima's methods. Sarah found herself studying him. The harsh businessman she'd first met seemed like a distant memory compared to the man before her now, making tea in his kitchen at midnight. "What?" he asked, noticing her gaze. "I was just thinking about what Amira said earlier about this being a business arrangement." Karim set the tea before her, his movements deliberate. "Does it still feel like one to you?" The question hung between them, weighted with months of shared experiences, small kindnesses and growing understanding. Before Sarah could answer, the baby kicked sharply, causing her to gasp. Without thinking, she grabbed Karim's hand, placing it where their child was making its presence known. The wonder in his eyes, as he felt the movement, made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with pregnancy. They stayed like that, connected by their child's movements until the baby settled again. "No," Sarah finally answered his question, her voice barely above a whisper. "This hasn't felt like business for quite some time." The confession seemed to shift something in the air between them. Karim's hand remained on her belly, his thumb making small unconscious circles. "Sarah," he began, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." A crash from the hallway interrupted the moment. They turned to find Fatima in the doorway, a broken teacup at her feet. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she apologized, but her eyes were twinkling as she bent to clean up the mess. Don't mind me, pretend I'm not even here. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in the dynamics between Sarah and Karim. The interrupted moment in the kitchen had created an undercurrent of unspoken feelings that colored their every interaction. Their careful professional distance had given way to something more intimate, shared glances, lingering touches, conversations that stretched long into the evening. One morning, as Sarah arranged fresh flowers in the main hall, she overheard a conversation between Karim and Ahmad al-Mansouri that made her pause. "You've withdrawn from our business merger discussions," Ahmad was saying, his tone carefully controlled. "My daughter is quite disappointed. She had hoped." "I apologize if I've caused any disappointment," Karim replied firmly, "but my priorities have changed. I'm pursuing a different direction for both my business and personal life." "This is about the English girl, isn't it?" Ahmad's voice carried a note of disapproval. "The one carrying your heir? Karim, be reasonable. A proper marriage could still salvage this situation. Layla would be willing to accept the child, raise it as her own." "There is nothing to salvage," Karim interrupted, his voice taking on an edge Sarah had never heard before. "The mother of my child is not a situation to be managed or a problem to be solved. She is." He paused and Sarah held her breath. "She is everything I never knew I was looking for." The sound of footsteps indicated Ahmad's departure, and Sarah quickly busied herself with the flowers, her heart racing at Karim's words. She felt his presence before she saw him, the air changing with his proximity. "How much did you hear?" he asked softly. Sarah turned to face him, the flowers forgotten. "Enough." "I meant every word," he said, taking a step closer. "Though perhaps it's time I said them to you directly, instead of to Ahmad al-Mansouri." Before he could continue, Amira burst into the hall, her face alight with excitement. "Sarah, the baby shower preparations are complete. You must come see the arrangements." She paused, noting the tension between them. "Am I interrupting something?" "Yes," Karim said, just as Sarah said no. They looked at each other, and Sarah couldn't help but laugh at the frustration evident on Karim's face. Amira glanced between them, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Well, whatever this is, it can wait. The baby shower is tomorrow and everything must be perfect." She linked her arm through Sarah's, leading her away. "Come, you need to approve. The final details." The baby shower was a blend of British and Arabian traditions, much like the nursery. The mansion's grand salon had been transformed with delicate decorations in soft pastels and gold. Traditional Arabic sweets sat alongside English tea cakes, and guests from both cultures mingled seamlessly. Sarah, dressed in a flowing gown chosen by Amira, found herself overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance of the Al-Hassan family. Even the most traditional aunts, who had initially been skeptical, now treated her with affection, touching her belly and offering advice and blessings in mixed Arabic and English. During a quiet moment, Sarah slipped away to the garden for some air. The evening was cooling, the desert sky painted in spectacular shades of purple and gold. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Karim approaching. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, just needed a moment. It's all a bit overwhelming." She gestured to the elaborate celebration. "A year ago, I was just a maid trying to help my mother. Now you're family," he completed, moving to stand beside her. "Sarah, what I was trying to say this morning." "There you are." Fatima's voice interrupted them once again. "The guests are asking for you both. It's time for the gifts." Karim let out a frustrated breath that made Sarah smile. "We seem to have a timing problem," she observed. "No," he said, taking her hand. "We have an audience problem. Come with me." Leading her away from the party, he guided her to the garden house, the place where everything had changed months ago during the family council. The small building was... The news of their engagement spread through the Al-Hassan mansion like a desert wind, swift and all-encompassing. Fatima was the first to embrace them as they returned to the party, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. Amira, upon seeing the ring on Sarah's finger, let out a cry of delight that drew everyone's attention. "Finally!" she exclaimed, hugging them both. "I was wondering how many more interruptions it would take, before my brother found the courage to speak his heart. The baby shower transformed into an impromptu engagement celebration, with guests offering congratulations in a mix of Arabic and English. The Al Hassan family elders blessed the union with traditional prayers, while Sarah's colleagues from the staff shed their professional reserve to share in her joy. However, not everyone was celebrating. Ahmad al-Mansouri's face darkened when he heard the news, and he left the party abruptly, phone in hand. His departure caused a ripple of concern among the business-minded guests, but Karim seemed unconcerned, his focus entirely on Sarah and their future. The following days brought a whirlwind of changes. Sarah's quarters were moved to the family wing, though she insisted on maintaining some of her duties until the baby arrived. "I'm not going to suddenly start acting like I was born into privilege," she told Karim firmly. "I want our child to understand the value of work and humility." Karim's response was to kiss her soundly. "This is exactly why I love you." Their engagement made headlines in both the local and international press. The story of the British maid who captured the heart of one of the UAE's most eligible bachelors sparked intense media interest. Some outlets painted it as a modern fairy tale, while others took a more sensational approach, speculating about scandal and ulterior motives. One morning, as Sarah read yet another tabloid story about their relationship, Amira burst into the breakfast room, her face tense. "Have you seen the business news?" she asked, placing a tablet in front of Karim. "The Al-Mansouri group is making moves against us. They're trying to block the expansion into European markets." Karim scanned the article, his expression growing serious. "Ahmad is being petty. He thinks he can pressure us by threatening our business interests." "It's more than that," Amira continued. "There are rumors they're approaching our other partners, suggesting that your unconventional choices make you an unstable business ally." Sarah felt her heart sink. "This is because of me, isn't it? Because you chose me instead of Layla." "No," Karim said firmly, taking her hand. "This is because Ahmad can't accept that he can't control everyone around him, but he's about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating people." Over the next few days, Karim worked tirelessly, making calls and holding meetings. Sarah watched with pride as he handled the crisis with characteristic determination. But what touched her most was how he never once let business concerns overshadow their personal happiness. Every evening, no matter how challenging the day had been, he made time to be with her, to talk to their unborn child, to plan their future. One evening, as they sat in the nursery, Karim designing a new business strategy while Sarah folded tiny clothes, Amira joined them with unexpected news. "You'll never believe who just called me," she said, settling into a rocking chair. "Layla, Al-Mansouri herself." Both Sarah and Karim looked up in surprise. "She wanted me to know that she's withdrawn her father's marriage proposal officially," Amira continued. "Apparently she's been secretly dating a British businessman herself for the past year. She was as reluctant about the arranged marriage as you were, brother." Sarah couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "So all this drama could have been avoided if everyone had just been honest from the start," Amira finished. "Layla's planning to announce her own engagement next week. She hopes it will help calm her father down." The tension that had been building seemed to dissolve with this news. As if sensing the moment, the baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly energetic kick. Sarah guided Amira's hand to feel it, and soon all three of them were laughing, as the little one continued its acrobatics. "You know," Amira said softly, "Mother always said that love had a way of sorting things out in its own time. I never really understood what she meant until now." Looking at Karim's face, filled with love as he felt their child move, Sarah understood perfectly. What had started as a business arrangement had transformed into something far more precious than any contract could define. They had found each other not through careful planning or traditional arrangements, but through the unexpected twists of fate and the courage to follow their hearts. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. Traditional Arabic customs merged seamlessly with British traditions, creating a celebration that symbolized the bridging of their two worlds. Amira took charge of the arrangements with characteristic efficiency, while Fatima ensured that every detail honored both families' customs. Sarah's mother, Margaret, finally well enough to travel thanks to her successful treatment, arrived from Manchester 2 weeks before the ceremony. Her first meeting with the Al-Hassan family was touching. Despite the language barrier, she and Karim's aunts formed an immediate bond, communicating through gestures and shared grandmother-to-be excitement. "I hardly dare believe it," Margaret told Sarah one evening as they sat in the garden. "When you first told me about working in Dubai, I was so worried. And now look at you, you're glowing, darling." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. "Are you happy, Mum, with all of this?" "Happy? Oh, my dear girl." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I see the way he looks at you. That's not the look of a man who's marrying out of obligation. That's love, pure and simple." The wedding preparations were temporarily interrupted by an unexpected visit from Ahmad al-Mansouri. He arrived unannounced one afternoon, looking somewhat uncomfortable, but determined. "I owe you both an apology," he said formally, standing in Karim's study. "My daughter Layla helped me understand that I was holding on to outdated notions of what makes a suitable match. Watching her happiness with her British fiancé, well, it made me reconsider many things." Karim accepted the apology with grace, and by the end of the meeting, the business tensions had been resolved as well. As Ahmad left, he turned to Sarah with a slight smile. "You know, my wife was a teacher before we married. My family objected at first, but she proved to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Perhaps it's time we all learn to look beyond our preconceptions." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the desert sun casting a golden glow over the proceedings. The ceremony was held in the mansion's gardens, where Sarah had once tended, the flowers as a maid. Now those same gardens were transformed into a fairy tale setting, with thousands of blooms creating a magical atmosphere. Sarah wore a dress that, like everything else about their union, bridged both cultures, a modern Western design incorporating traditional Arabic embroidery. Karim, waiting for her beneath an arch of roses, looked at her with such love that her heart felt ready to burst. The ceremony itself was a beautiful blend of traditions. They exchanged vows in both Arabic and English, their words carrying across the hushed gathering of family and friends. When Karim kissed his bride, the assembled guests erupted in joyous celebration, traditional ululations mixing with applause. During the reception, as Sarah danced with her new husband, she felt the baby move energetically. "Someone's enjoying the party," she laughed, placing Karim's hand on her belly. "Of course," he smiled, pulling her closer. "Our child knows this is where all of us belong together." Later, as the celebrations continued, Sarah found herself sitting with Fatima, watching the mixing of cultures on the dance floor. British relatives were attempting to learn traditional Arabic dances, while Karim's younger cousins showed off their best Western dance moves. "You know," Fatima said, her wise eyes twinkling, "when you first arrived here as a quiet English maid, I saw something special in you. Allah has a way of bringing the right people together, even if the path seems strange at first." "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the joyous scene before them. "Habibti," Fatima smiled, patting her hand, "love follows its own path. All we can do is be brave enough to follow where it leads." 2 months after the wedding, the Al-Hassan mansion buzzed with a different kind of excitement. Sarah's contractions had started in the early morning hours, and the household sprang into action with well-rehearsed precision. Karim, despite his usual composed demeanor, paced the hospital corridor like any nervous father-to-be. The private wing of Dubai's most prestigious hospital had been prepared for weeks, but nothing could have prepared Karim for the emotions that overwhelmed him when he first heard his son's cry. The baby was perfect, a beautiful blend of both his parents, with Sarah's fair complexion and Karim's dark hair. "He's beautiful," Amira whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her nephew for the first time. "He looks just like you did as a baby, brother." Margaret, who had extended her stay to be present for the birth, couldn't stop smiling as she watched her daughter with her new family. The joy in Sarah's eyes as she held her son made all the struggles of the past year fade away like desert mirages. The baby's naming ceremony was a grand affair, blending traditional Arabic customs with modern celebrations. They named him Zayn Alexander Al-Hassan, honoring both his Arabic and British heritage. The name Zayn, meaning